In the autumn of 1923, a chilling event unfolded in the small town of Willow Creek, an incident that would ripple through the community for decades and challenge the very fabric of legal and social understanding. It was the day of Eleanor Whitman's wedding, a day meant to mark new beginnings and hopeful futures, yet it became a haunting narrative of love, interrupted by death, yet somehow legally preserved. The story of the bride who died mid-ceremony, but was still declared legally married, defies common sense and continues to puzzle historians, lawyers, and curious minds alike. Before we dive into the haunting tale of Eleanor Whitman, the bride who tragically died mid-ceremony, yet remained legally married, make sure to subscribe and like the video to stay updated with our captivating stories. And let me know, what are your thoughts on love and loss? To comprehend the weight of this bizarre case, we must first immerse ourselves in the world of 1920s America, a time of significant social change, yet one still grounded in rigid legal structures and traditional values. The Roaring Twenties brought flapper dresses, jazz music, and a loosening of social mores in many urban centers. But small towns like Willow Creek remained bastions of convention and close-knit communities where reputation and tradition held sway. Here, marriage was not merely a personal union, but a public contract sanctified by both church and law, a binding agreement that defined family, property, and social standing. Willow Creek was a modest town nestled amid rolling hills and farmlands, its population barely reaching a few thousand. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, histories, and secrets, where a wedding was a communal celebration and an event of collective joy. On the morning of October 14th, 1923, the town buzzed with anticipation. St. Mary's Church, a century-old stone edifice with stained glass windows, casting colorful light on polished wooden pews, was prepared for the occasion. Flowers adorned the altar, and the townsfolk gathered in their Sunday best, eager to witness the union of two of their own. Eleanor Whitman, the bride, was the daughter of one of Willow Creek's most respected families. Her family's roots in the town ran deep, with generations of Whitmans having tilled the soil and served in local offices. Eleanor herself was seen as a paragon of grace and virtue, a young woman admired for her kindness, intelligence, and unwavering devotion to family and community. Her engagement to Thomas Caldwell, a promising young businessman from a neighboring town, had been met with widespread approval, and their wedding was anticipated as a joyous milestone, a symbol of hope and continuity. As the afternoon sunlight filtered through the church's stained glass, the congregation settled in, the air thick with expectation and the sweet scent of lilies. The ceremony began with the solemn procession, the soft strains of the organ filling the sanctuary. Eleanor, radiant in a lace gown that had belonged to her mother, walked down the aisle with the steady support of her father. Thomas stood at the altar, his expression a mixture of nervousness and happiness, his eyes never leaving his bride. The ceremony proceeded as tradition dictated: prayers, readings, and the exchange of vows. When the moment came for Eleanor and Thomas to declare their commitment, the church held its collective breath. Eleanor spoke her vows clearly, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment, promises of love, fidelity, and partnership through all challenges to come. Thomas responded in kind, his words echoing with sincerity and hope. But then, in the instant following Eleanor's final "I do," tragedy struck. Without warning, Eleanor collapsed, her body crumpling to the floor, a silent gasp rippling through the pews. Panic erupted as guests rushed forward, some crying out for help, others frozen in shock. The officiating priest knelt beside her, his face pale and strained, while others scrambled for a doctor among the attendees. The immediate response was swift but grim. Dr. Samuel Briggs, a local physician, quickly assessed Eleanor's condition and pronounced her dead at the scene, her heart having ceased its steady beat moments after the vows were exchanged. The joyous occasion was shattered, replaced by a heavy silence and a profound sense of loss. The wedding guests, once filled with hope and celebration, now grappled with disbelief and grief. Yet, amid the sorrow, a perplexing question arose. What did Eleanor's sudden death mean for the marriage? Could a union be considered legally binding if one partner died during the ceremony itself? The question was far from trivial. In 1920s America, marriage was both a sacred covenant and a legal contract, conferring rights and responsibilities that extended beyond the ceremony to property, inheritance, and social status. The unusual circumstances of Eleanor's death at the very moment of commitment left the community, clergy, and local officials wrestling with an unprecedented dilemma. The scene at St. Mary's Church remained etched in the memories of those present. A somber tableau of love's promise, abruptly halted by death, yet somehow left incomplete. The traditional markers of marriage had been observed: vows spoken aloud, witnesses present, and the ritual of union enacted. But the collapse and immediate death of the bride cast a shadow of uncertainty over the validity of the marriage itself. The legal frameworks in place at the time offered little guidance for such a scenario. Marriage laws were clear about the requirements for a valid union: consent, exchange of vows, and public acknowledgement. But they did not explicitly address the question of a partner's death occurring mid-ceremony. The question was not only academic, but deeply practical. Would Thomas Caldwell be recognized as a widower? Would he have rights to Eleanor's estate or social status as her husband? Would the community accept such a marriage as legitimate, or dismiss it as null due to its abrupt and tragic end? As word of the incident spread through Willow Creek and beyond, it sparked heated discussions among legal experts, clergy, and laypeople alike. Some argued that the marriage was never consummated, that Eleanor's death rendered the ceremony incomplete and thus invalid. Others contended that the vows spoken, witnessed by the congregation, and formally recorded, regardless of death's interference, constituted a binding contract. This debate was not confined to Willow Creek. It touched on broader issues of law, morality, and the nature of commitment itself. The story of Eleanor Whitman's wedding day became more than a local tragedy. It grew into a profound mystery that challenged accepted norms and forced a reassessment of legal definitions. The small town of Willow Creek, with its stately church and close-knit community, had become the unlikely stage for a case that would intrigue legal scholars and historians for generations. Eleanor's death in the very moment of union blurred the lines between life and death, love and loss, promise and finality. In the days that followed, the community grappled not only with grief, but with the unprecedented legal and social questions raised by the event. The marriage ceremony that had begun with joyous anticipation ended in a silence heavier than any words, a silence filled with unanswered questions about the nature of marriage, the boundaries of the law, and the enduring mystery of a bride who died mid-ceremony, yet remained, in the eyes of some, legally wedded. Eleanor Whitman's life before that fateful autumn afternoon was woven into the very fabric of Willow Creek's history and society. To understand the profound impact of her sudden death during the wedding ceremony, it is essential to trace the contours of her background, a story of lineage, community standing, and personal aspirations that made her not only a beloved daughter, but also a symbol of hope for generations to come. Born on March 22, 1902, Eleanor was the only child of Jonathan and Margaret Whitman, a couple whose ancestry in Willow Creek extended back nearly a century. The Whitmans were among the town's founding families, known for their steadfast commitment to agriculture, local governance, and philanthropy. Jonathan, a respected landowner and town council member, was regarded as a pillar of the community, his reputation built on integrity and a cautious but forward-thinking approach to progress. Margaret, known for her charitable work and involvement in the church, was equally esteemed, embodying the virtues of grace and resilience that the town admired. Eleanor's upbringing was marked by a blend of tradition and encouragement for personal growth. She was educated at the local academy, where she excelled in literature and history, subjects that fueled her curiosity about the wider world beyond Willow Creek's borders. Despite the town's small size, Eleanor harbored ambitions that extended beyond the expectations traditionally placed upon young women in rural America. She corresponded with pen pals in cities like Chicago and New York, dreaming of travel and experiences that seemed distant but tantalizingly possible. Yet Eleanor's life was deeply rooted in her community and family. Her days were filled with helping at the family farm during harvest seasons, participating in church activities, and attending social gatherings that reinforced the close-knit nature of Willow Creek. She was known for her warm demeanor, generosity, and an innate ability to listen, qualities that endeared her to neighbors and friends alike. In a town where everyone's lives were interconnected, Eleanor represented both the continuity of heritage and the promise of a brighter future. It was against this backdrop that her relationship with Thomas Caldwell began. Thomas, the son of a prominent businessman from the nearby town of Pine Ridge, had come to Willow Creek several years prior to expand his family's lumber enterprise into the region. His arrival was met with curiosity and cautious optimism. Unlike the Whitmans, whose roots were deep and established, the Caldwells were newcomers eager to make their mark. Thomas's charismatic presence and progressive ideas quickly won over many in the community, though some remained skeptical of the outsider's intentions. Eleanor and Thomas met at a summer festival in 1920, a gathering that brought together residents from surrounding towns for music, dancing, and shared celebration. Their connection was immediate, a meeting of minds and hearts marked by mutual respect and a shared vision for the future. Correspondence followed, and over time their courtship became the subject of quiet admiration and hopeful gossip throughout Willow Creek. Many saw in their union the merging of tradition and modernity, a partnership that could elevate the town's standing and bring new opportunities. Despite the excitement surrounding their engagement, Eleanor remained grounded. Her letters to friends reveal a young woman filled with optimism, but also a clear sense of responsibility. She was conscious of the expectations placed upon her, to honor her family's legacy, to support her future husband's ambitions, and to uphold the values of their community. Yet beneath this sense of duty lay a genuine affection for Thomas, a man whose kindness and determination matched her own. Community expectations for the wedding were high. Preparations spanned weeks, with families contributing to the event in various ways, from sewing dresses to baking cakes and decorating the church. The Whitman household was a hive of activity, with Eleanor's mother ensuring every detail reflected the family's pride and adherence to tradition. For Eleanor, the wedding was more than a ceremony. It was a milestone that symbolized the culmination of years of hope and hard work, a public affirmation of love and commitment. Eleanor's personality shone brightly during this time. She was described by those close to her as radiant, her excitement tempered by a quiet composure. She spoke often of the future she envisioned with Thomas, a home filled with laughter, children playing in the fields, and a life built on shared dreams and mutual respect. Her faith, nurtured through years of church involvement, provided solace and strength, grounding her in the face of life's uncertainties. The social fabric of Willow Creek was tightly woven, and Eleanor's role within it was significant. She participated in charitable endeavors, assisted in organizing community events, and was viewed as a role model for younger girls. Her influence extended beyond her immediate circle, embodying the ideals of womanhood that the town cherished: kindness, perseverance, and unwavering loyalty. This made the impact of her sudden death all the more profound, as it struck not only a family, but an entire community that had invested in her future. Thomas Caldwell's position was equally complex. As a man striving to establish his identity within a new environment, his relationship with Eleanor represented both personal and social achievement. His business prospects in Willow Creek were intertwined with his acceptance by local families, and his engagement to Eleanor was seen as a bridge between old and new. Thomas was known for his work ethic, charm, and a genuine respect for the town's traditions, qualities that earned him a cautious but growing trust among residents. Their relationship was marked by correspondence, filled with expressions of hope and devotion, plans for a future together, and shared dreams that transcended their differing backgrounds. Letters exchanged in the months leading to the wedding reveal a couple deeply connected, navigating the challenges of blending families and communities with grace. Thomas's affection for Eleanor was evident in his frequent references to her kindness and strength, while Eleanor's words reflected admiration for his ambition and character. The Whitman and Caldwell families, though different in heritage, found common ground through their children's union. The impending wedding was celebrated as a testament to love's power to unite, transcending social divides and forging bonds that promised prosperity and harmony. Both families invested heavily in the event, viewing it as a landmark occasion that would cement their legacies within the community. Eleanor's life before the wedding was thus a tapestry of tradition, aspiration, and connection. She embodied the hopes of a generation caught between the old world and the new, balancing familial duty with personal dreams. Her story was not merely that of a bride, but of a young woman whose presence illuminated the lives of those around her, whose future seemed bright and boundless. As the day of the wedding approached, the excitement in Willow Creek grew palpable. Neighbors exchanged stories of Eleanor's childhood and praised Thomas's efforts to fit into their world. Children rehearsed their roles in the ceremony, while elders reminisced about past weddings and the continuity of life's cycles. The town was alive with anticipation, united in the belief that this union would bring joy and stability. Yet, beneath the surface of celebration lay the fragile reality of life's unpredictability, a truth that would soon be revealed in the most tragic and confounding way. Eleanor Whitman's story, rich with promise and steeped in community, was about to take a turn that no one could have foreseen, a turn that would forever alter the course of Willow Creek's history and challenge the very understanding of love, death, and the bonds that tie them together. The day of Eleanor Whitman's wedding dawned bright and clear, casting a golden light over Willow Creek and filling the town with a sense of joyous expectation. October 14th, 1923, was marked on calendars throughout the community as a day of celebration, a moment when two lives would be joined in a ceremony steeped in tradition and hope. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the excitement of friends and family, neighbors and strangers gathered in the venerable St. Mary's Church to witness the union of Eleanor and Thomas. St. Mary's, with its towering stone facade and intricate stained-glass windows, had long been the spiritual heart of Willow Creek. Its wooden pews, worn smooth by generations of worshippers, were polished and arranged to accommodate the throng of guests who had come from near and far. The church was decorated lavishly, garlands of autumn leaves intertwined with white roses, delicate ribbons cascading from the balcony, and candles casting a warm, flickering glow that danced upon the walls. The scent of fresh flowers mingled with the faint aroma of polished wood and beeswax, creating an atmosphere both sacred and celebratory. As the hour approached, the congregation settled into their seats, the murmur of whispered greetings and soft laughter punctuating the quiet hum of anticipation. Women in their finest dresses, men in crisp suits, and children clutching programs filled the pews, their faces alight with smiles and the unspoken understanding that they were witnesses to a pivotal moment in the town's history. The church choir, stationed in the loft above the altar, tuned their voices in preparation, ready to lift their hymns in praise and blessing. Eleanor arrived in a horse-drawn carriage, her arrival heralded by a ripple of admiration and affectionate cheers. She stepped from the vehicle with the grace and composure that had become her hallmark, her lace wedding gown shimmering softly in the afternoon light. The gown, a family heirloom passed down from her mother, was a delicate masterpiece of intricate embroidery and fine silk, symbolizing a lineage of love and commitment. Her veil, sheer and flowing, framed her serene face, while a bouquet of white lilies and wildflowers rested gently in her hands. The bride's entrance was met with hushed awe as she walked down the aisle, supported by her father, Jonathan Whitman, whose proud smile betrayed a mixture of joy and solemnity. Eleanor's eyes searched the crowd briefly before settling on Thomas Caldwell, who stood at the altar, his expression a blend of nervous anticipation and profound love. Their gaze met, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The ceremony began with the familiar liturgy, the priest's voice steady and reverent as he led the congregation in prayer. The organ's deep tones filled the sanctuary, weaving a tapestry of sound that underscored the solemnity and significance of the occasion. Passages from Scripture were read aloud, emphasizing themes of fidelity, compassion, and the sacred bond of marriage. The congregation responded with measured choruses, their voices blending in a communal expression of faith and hope. The exchange of vows was the ceremony's emotional apex. Eleanor and Thomas stood side by side, hands clasped, as they recited their promises before God and their assembled witnesses. Eleanor's voice, clear and unwavering, spoke of love, loyalty, and the pledge to stand by Thomas, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death do us part. Thomas echoed her sentiments, his words imbued with sincerity and a quiet strength that reflected his character. Guests were moved by the sincerity of the vows, some dabbing tears from their eyes, others holding hands tightly as the weight of the moment settled over them. The priest pronounced the couple husband and wife, inviting Thomas to kiss his bride, a gesture that symbolized the sealing of their union, the beginning of a shared life. It was in the seconds immediately following this joyful exchange that the unthinkable occurred. Eleanor, who moments before had radiated happiness and vitality, suddenly faltered. Her eyes widened in surprise and pain. Her body stiffened, and then she collapsed forward, slipping from Thomas's grasp and falling silently to the floor. The hushed congregation erupted into gasps and cries, the sacred atmosphere shattered by the suddenness of tragedy. Immediate chaos ensued. Some guests rushed to Eleanor's side, while others called out for help. The priest knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her forehead, his face pale and filled with alarm. Thomas, stunned and overwhelmed, leaned over his bride, his voice caught in a choked whisper as he called her name. The church, moments before, filled with song and prayer, was now heavy with fear and confusion. Among the attendees was Dr. Samuel Briggs, the local physician, who pushed through the crowd to reach Eleanor. His hands were steady, but his face grim as he assessed her condition. Despite his efforts, it quickly became clear that Eleanor had suffered a fatal collapse. The cause was unknown in that instant, a heart attack, a stroke, or some sudden ailment. But death was declared on the spot. The joy that had filled St. Mary's was extinguished, replaced by a profound silence that seemed to echo through the very walls. The guests lingered in stunned disbelief. Some wept openly, others stood frozen, unable to reconcile the joyous moment that had just passed with the grim reality before them. Thomas remained by Eleanor's side, his grief raw and immediate, his mind struggling to comprehend the cruel twist of fate. The priest, gathering his composure, called for calm and order, urging the congregation to respect the solemnity of the moment, despite the tragedy. The wedding that had promised a future was abruptly transformed into a scene of mourning. The ceremony, which had proceeded with all the trappings of tradition and celebration, now bore the mark of an unimaginable loss. The church's stained glass windows, casting fractured light upon the floor, seemed to weep with the congregation, their colors muted by the sorrow that filled the air. In the days that followed, the memory of that bright autumn afternoon lingered in the minds of the townspeople. They recounted the joyful procession, the heartfelt vows, the communal songs, and then the sudden collapse that shattered their collective hope. The wedding had been a public declaration of love and commitment, but it had ended in tragedy, leaving questions that extended beyond personal grief to the realms of law, faith, and social order. The events within St. Mary's on that day would become the subject of intense scrutiny and debate, their significance reaching far beyond Willow Creek's borders. The juxtaposition of celebration and death, union and loss, created a paradox that unsettled not only a community, but also the institutions tasked with interpreting the meaning and consequences of marriage. The story of Eleanor Whitman's wedding day, captured in the memories of those who witnessed it, remains a haunting tableau, a moment frozen between hope and despair, life and death, joy and sorrow. It is a story that challenges the boundaries of understanding and invites reflection on the fragility of human plans in the face of fate's unpredictable hand. The moments following Eleanor Whitman's sudden collapse were marked by a flurry of urgent activity and profound grief within the sacred walls of St. Mary's Church. As the congregation grappled with the shock of seeing their beloved bride fall lifeless to the floor, the immediate priority became ensuring that every possible measure was taken to save her. Yet, despite the swift response, the harsh truth soon settled over the room. Eleanor was gone. Dr. Samuel Briggs, the local physician who had been attending the wedding as a guest, quickly moved through the crowd to reach Eleanor's side. His experience and calm demeanor in emergencies brought a fleeting sense of hope to the panicked assembly. Kneeling beside her, he checked for a pulse, listened for breath, and examined her pupils. His face, usually composed and reassuring, betrayed a grim finality as he declared that Eleanor had passed away on the spot. The weight of this announcement was immediate and overwhelming. Gasps and cries filled the church, the joyous atmosphere shattered by the stark reality of death, intruding upon what should have been a celebration of life and love. Some guests collapsed into sobs, others clutched each other for comfort, and a few stood rooted, their faces pale and eyes wide with disbelief. The priest, Father O'Donnell, bowed his head in silent prayer, struggling to find words that could offer solace in such an unbearable moment. For the Whitman family, the blow was devastating beyond measure. Jonathan Whitman, Eleanor's father, was seen gripping the pew tightly, his knuckles white with the strain of shock and sorrow. Margaret Whitman, Eleanor's mother, covered her face with trembling hands, her body racked with sobs that seemed to echo through the stillness. The entire family had gathered for what was to be a day of joy and new beginnings, and now they faced an unimaginable loss that would forever scar their lives. Thomas Caldwell, the groom, was equally shattered. His expression vacillated between stunned numbness and deep anguish as he knelt beside Eleanor's lifeless form. Friends and family reached out to support him, but he remained focused on the bride who had just pledged her life to him only moments before. His whispered pleas and tender touches spoke of a love cut brutally short, a future erased in an instant. The church, a place of sanctuary and celebration, became a scene of profound tragedy. The stained glass windows that had bathed the ceremony in colorful light now cast muted shadows over the mourners. The organist ceased playing, the silence amplifying the collective grief that permeated the room. The congregation struggled to reconcile the stark contrast between the sacred vows just spoken and the sudden finality of death. The question that haunted everyone present was not merely how Eleanor had died, but what this meant for the ceremony itself. The wedding had begun with all the solemnity and tradition expected in Willow Creek, but now it stood suspended in uncertainty. Could a marriage be considered valid if one party died at the very moment of union? Was the couple truly wed, or had fate intervened to leave their commitment unfulfilled? These questions would soon extend beyond the emotional realm into the legal and social domains. But in the immediate aftermath, the focus remained on honoring Eleanor's memory and supporting those devastated by her loss. Plans were hastily made to notify relatives who had not been able to attend, and arrangements began for a funeral that would both mourn the young life lost and attempt to bring some measure of closure to the grieving community. Local officials were summoned to the church to document the events and assist in managing the unfolding crisis. The town clerk, witnesses, and clergy provided statements detailing the progression of the ceremony and the exact moment of Eleanor's collapse. These accounts would later prove crucial in the complex legal debates that followed, as every detail was scrutinized in determining the status of the marriage. In the days that followed, the town of Willow Creek was enveloped in a somber mood. The news of Eleanor's death spread beyond the church walls, touching every corner of the community. Shops closed early, schools observed moments of silence, and neighbors gathered to offer condolences to the Whitman and Caldwell families. The once vibrant anticipation surrounding the wedding was replaced by a collective mourning that underscored the fragile nature of life and the unpredictability of fate. Discussions among townsfolk often circled back to the wedding ceremony, with many expressing confusion and sorrow over the circumstances. Some questioned how such a joyous event could turn so tragic so swiftly, while others pondered the spiritual implications of a marriage interrupted by death. The clergy were called upon to provide guidance and comfort, their sermons addressing themes of loss, faith, and the enduring power of love even in the face of mortality. Amid the grief, practical concerns arose. The question of whether the marriage had legally taken place became a source of uncertainty and tension. Local authorities and legal advisors began to examine the situation, aware that the answers would have significant ramifications for inheritance, property rights, and social standing. The Whitman and Caldwell families, while united in mourning, found themselves facing the complexities of a legal puzzle that neither had anticipated. The declaration of Eleanor's death on the spot, a fact witnessed and recorded by multiple officials, became a pivotal point in these discussions. The timing of her passing, immediately after the vows were exchanged, but before the ceremony was formally concluded, raised unprecedented legal questions. Was the exchange of vows sufficient to constitute a valid marriage, or did her sudden death render the union void? Did Thomas Caldwell hold any rights as a widower, or was he simply a grieving fiancé left without legal recognition? These questions would soon demand formal adjudication, but in those early days, they lingered as a source of confusion and debate among the community. The wedding, intended as a celebration of love and unity, had become a symbol of the fragile boundary between life and death, hope and despair. Eleanor Whitman's death in the midst of her wedding ceremony left an indelible mark on Willow Creek. It was a tragedy that transcended personal loss, touching on the fundamental intersections of law, society, and human experience. The immediate aftermath was a time of mourning and reflection, but it also marked the beginning of a complex journey toward understanding the legal and social consequences of a marriage interrupted by death. As the town grappled with these realities, the story of the bride who died mid-ceremony began to take shape. A story that would challenge conventions, provoke debate, and ultimately leave a legacy far beyond the confines of Willow Creek's quiet streets. In the wake of Eleanor Whitman's tragic death during her wedding ceremony, the town of Willow Creek found itself plunged into an unprecedented legal quandary. The immediate grief that had enveloped the community began to give way to pressing questions about the status of the union that had so abruptly ended. At the heart of this dilemma stood the local justice of the peace, Reverend Thomas Langley, and the clergy of St. Mary's Church, who now faced the daunting task of determining whether the marriage could be considered legally binding despite the extraordinary circumstances. Marriage, in the early 1920s, was both a sacred rite and a legal contract, governed by well-established statutes and religious traditions. The ceremony itself was understood to be the culmination of a process that required mutual consent, the exchange of vows, and the pronouncement by an authorized officiant. Yet the law was silent, or at least ambiguous, on the question of what occurred if one party died at the very moment the vows were spoken. Reverend Langley, who had officiated numerous weddings throughout his tenure, was unprepared for the complex situation now confronting him. The normal protocols offered little guidance. The vows had been exchanged. The couple had declared their commitment before witnesses, but the bride had collapsed and died almost immediately afterward. Did this constitute a valid marriage, or was the union rendered null by the untimely death? The local justice of the peace, Mr. Harold Simpson, was soon drawn into the matter. Known for his meticulous attention to legal detail and calm demeanor, Simpson began consulting the town's legal records, state statutes, and precedents from other jurisdictions. To his surprise, he found scant reference to cases where death had interrupted the ceremony itself. Most marriage laws focused on consent and ceremony completion, but none addressed the precise moment of death occurring mid-ritual. Simpson convened meetings with the town council and sought counsel from legal experts in the county seat, hoping to find clarity. The community awaited his guidance, understanding that the implications extended beyond the personal tragedy to matters of inheritance, property rights, and social recognition. If the marriage were deemed valid, Thomas Caldwell would legally be Eleanor's widower, entitled to certain rights and responsibilities. If not, he would remain a fiancé, without legal claim to Eleanor's estate or status. The clergy at St. Mary's were equally divided. Father O'Donnell, who had conducted the ceremony, wrestled with his own theological and pastoral concerns. On one hand, the vows had been solemnly spoken before God and congregation. On the other, the sanctity of marriage traditionally required the union to be consummated in both ritual and life. The question of whether the sacrament had been completed in the presence of death was both a spiritual and practical puzzle. Some church members argued that the marriage was valid, emphasizing the power and intention of the vows, which had been freely exchanged. They believed that death did not annul a sacred promise made before God. Others held that the sudden death interrupted the process, rendering the union incomplete and thus invalid according to church doctrine. These conflicting views mirrored the broader community's uncertainty. The legal ambiguity prompted early attempts to annul or declare the marriage void. Thomas Caldwell, desperate for recognition of his status and rights, petitioned the court to affirm the validity of the marriage. His lawyers argued that the exchange of vows, witnessed and recorded, fulfilled the legal requirements for matrimony. They cited precedents where marriages were recognized despite unconventional circumstances, emphasizing the intention and consent demonstrated at the ceremony. Opponents, including some members of Eleanor's extended family, contested this position. They argued that the sudden death precluded the completion of the marriage ceremony, and that recognizing the union would set a dangerous precedent. Their concerns extended beyond legal technicalities to moral and social considerations, fearing that validating such a marriage could undermine traditional marriage laws and customs. As the debate intensified, the community found itself divided. Newspapers in nearby towns picked up the story, framing it as a legal curiosity and a tragic love story. Editorials pondered the nature of marriage, consent, and death's intrusion into human affairs. The case became a topic of discussion in legal circles and among clergy, who debated the balance between letter of the law and spirit of commitment. In Willow Creek, the tension was palpable. Families aligned themselves on different sides of the issue. Neighbors whispered heated opinions, and the once unified community experienced fractures born from uncertainty and grief. Reverend Langley and Mr. Simpson found themselves at the center of a storm, charged with guiding the town through uncharted legal and moral waters. To complicate matters, the marriage certificate, a crucial document in affirming the union, had been signed immediately after the ceremony, even though Eleanor had already died. Witnesses present at the church testified that the officiant had completed the paperwork in the moments following her collapse, a detail that added layers of complexity to the legal interpretation. Was the timing of the certificate's signing sufficient to validate the marriage, or was it merely a formality rendered meaningless by the tragic interruption? In response, local officials initiated a thorough examination of the documentation and witness accounts. Depositions were taken from clergy, guests, and legal authorities present at the ceremony. The timing of each event was scrutinized with painstaking detail, as every second held potential significance in the eyes of the law. The case soon attracted attention from legal scholars and historians who saw in it a rare intersection of matrimonial law, mortality, and societal norms. Some posited that the case would force legislative bodies to revisit and clarify marriage statutes to account for such extraordinary situations. Others viewed it as a poignant reminder of the unpredictability of life and the limitations of human institutions in the face of death. Throughout this process, Thomas Caldwell maintained his stance with quiet dignity, insisting on honoring the commitment he believed had been made. His resolve was both personal and symbolic, representing a desire to uphold the sanctity of the vows exchanged and to seek justice for a union disrupted by fate. Meanwhile, the Whitman family's position remained cautious. While mourning their daughter, they grappled with the implications of a legal marriage that might affect their family estate and social standing. Their concerns reflected the practical realities intertwined with the emotional weight of their loss. In the midst of these deliberations, the town of Willow Creek watched and waited, aware that the resolution of this unprecedented case would resonate far beyond their borders. The question posed was deceptively simple, yet profoundly complex. Can a marriage be legally binding if one partner dies during the ceremony? This question challenged not only the existing legal framework, but also the community's understanding of marriage as a social and spiritual institution. It forced a reckoning with the boundaries of life, death, and commitment, and underscored the fragile intersection between human intention and the inexorable forces of fate. As the local justice of the peace and clergy continued their consultations and investigations, the story of Eleanor Whitman and Thomas Caldwell took on a life of its own, a narrative that would ripple through legal texts, courtrooms, and hearts for years to come. It was a case that demanded not only legal interpretation, but deep reflection on the nature of love and the endurance of promise in the face of mortality. The controversy surrounding Eleanor Whitman's marriage took a decisive turn when local officials discovered that the marriage certificate had been signed immediately after the ceremony, despite Eleanor's untimely death. This discovery added a new layer of complexity to the already tangled legal and social questions that had gripped Willow Creek. The very existence of the signed certificate, a seemingly straightforward piece of documentation, now became a focal point of intense scrutiny and debate. Marriage certificates, by their nature, serve as official records affirming that a lawful union has taken place. They are intended to provide clear evidence of consent, ceremony completion, and legal acknowledgement by the appropriate authorities. In this case, the certificate bore the signatures of Reverend Thomas Langley, who had officiated the ceremony, and several witnesses who had been present in the church that day. However, the timing of the signing, occurring immediately after Eleanor's collapse and declaration of death, raised profound questions about its validity and implications. Local authorities, led by Justice of the Peace Harold Simpson, initiated a thorough examination of the marriage certificate and the circumstances surrounding its signing. The document itself was unremarkable in appearance. A standard form issued by the county, filled out with the names of Eleanor Whitman and Thomas Caldwell, the date of the ceremony, and the signatures of the officiant and witnesses. Yet, its significance was anything but ordinary. Simpson convened meetings with legal advisors and town officials to review witness testimonies regarding the precise timing of the certificate's completion. Many witnesses recalled that, despite the chaos that erupted following Eleanor's collapse, Reverend Langley had insisted on proceeding with the paperwork. He reasoned that since the vows had been exchanged and the ceremony technically concluded, the marriage certificate should be signed to reflect the union as it had occurred. Some witnesses described the scene with a mixture of reverence and bewilderment. The Reverend, his hands trembling but resolute, signing the document amid a hushed and grieving congregation. Thomas Caldwell, still kneeling beside his bride's lifeless form, was said to have signed as well, affirming his commitment even in the face of tragedy. Others signed as witnesses, their faces pale, but their signatures marking their acknowledgement of the union. This act of signing the certificate despite Eleanor's death, was met with mixed reactions. Supporters argued that it demonstrated a commitment to honoring the vows spoken and recognized the legal reality of the marriage. They viewed the certificate as the concrete evidence needed to affirm Thomas Caldwell's status as a widower and to secure his rights under the law. Opponents, however, contended that the certificate was a mere formality, rendered invalid by the circumstances. They argued that the signing could not retroactively validate a marriage interrupted by death, and that the document's existence should not obscure the fact that the bride had passed away before the union could be fully consummated. For them, the certificate was a tragic anomaly, a legal fiction that complicated what should have been a straightforward matter. The debate soon reached the local courts, where attorneys for both sides presented arguments centered on the marriage certificate's legal weight. Thomas Caldwell's counsel emphasized the certificate's role as official evidence of the ceremony's completion. They argued that the law recognized marriage as a binding contract upon the exchange of consent and vows, both of which had occurred and been witnessed. The signing of the certificate, they asserted, was a formal acknowledgement of that fact, irrespective of Eleanor's sudden death. Conversely, the opposing counsel questioned whether the certificate could override the fundamental requirement that marriage be a living union. They pointed to the timing of the signing as problematic, suggesting that it was an attempt to impose legal legitimacy on a union that had been tragically cut short. They cited legal principles that marriage required the parties to be alive and capable of entering into the contract at its conclusion. As the case unfolded, the examination of the certificate's validity became inextricably linked to witness testimonies and the specific sequence of events within the church. Depositions detailed the moments following Eleanor's collapse, how quickly the certificate was signed, who was present, and the emotional state of those involved. The testimonies painted a vivid picture of a community struggling to reconcile grief with the desire for legal clarity. This scrutiny extended beyond the courtroom. Newspapers and legal journals debated the implications of the certificate's signing, using the case as a lens through which to explore broader issues in matrimonial law. Was the physical act of signing a document sufficient to establish a marriage's validity, or did the circumstances surrounding the signing hold greater weight? Could the legal system accommodate such a rare and tragic event without setting problematic precedents? The reverberations of this debate reached the halls of state legislators, some of whom began considering whether existing marriage laws needed revision to address extraordinary cases like Eleanor's. The absence of clear statutes concerning death during a wedding ceremony was highlighted as a gap in the legal framework, one that could leave families and communities vulnerable to uncertainty and conflict. Meanwhile, the social implications of the certificate's signing were felt deeply within Willow Creek. The Whitman family, already mourning the loss of Eleanor, was divided on the issue. Some members saw the certificate as a source of solace, a tangible acknowledgement of Eleanor's commitment and the legitimacy of the union. Others viewed it with suspicion, concerned about the potential legal and financial consequences of recognizing the marriage. Thomas Caldwell, for his part, regarded the certificate as a vital affirmation of his bond with Eleanor. In his eyes, the signed document was more than mere paper. It was a testament to their vows and the love that had been abruptly severed. He insisted on pursuing recognition of the marriage, both to honor Eleanor's memory and to secure his rightful place as her husband in the eyes of the law. The community's reactions were equally complex. Some townspeople saw the certificate as a symbol of enduring love, a defiance of death's finality through legal acknowledgement. Others feared that such recognition blurred the lines between life and death, order and chaos, and challenged the sanctity of marriage as an institution grounded in the living commitment of two individuals. Within St. Mary's Church, the certificate's existence fostered ongoing discussions about the limits of ritual and the meaning of marriage vows. Clergy members pondered whether the timing and manner of the signing altered the sacramental nature of the ceremony, or whether it reinforced the spiritual bond between Eleanor and Thomas despite the tragedy. The marriage certificate, signed in the shadow of death, thus became more than a legal document. It transformed into a symbol of the tensions between law, tradition, grief, and hope. It forced Willow Creek, and beyond, to confront difficult questions about how human institutions respond to the unpredictable intersection of life's most sacred moments and its most devastating losses. As investigations and debates continued, the certificate's role in shaping the unfolding legal and social drama remained central. Its existence challenged officials to balance respect for tradition with the need for clarity, compassion with adherence to law, and the memories of a lost bride with the realities of a community seeking answers. The signature lines that had been inked on that autumn day carried a weight far beyond their modest size, anchoring a story that would ripple through time as a testament to love, loss, and the elusive nature of legal certainty. The revelation that Eleanor Whitman's marriage certificate had been signed moments after her death sparked a maelstrom of reactions within Willow Creek, rippling through the families involved and the wider community. What began as a private tragedy now unfolded into a public debate that touched on deeply held beliefs about love, law, and social order. The divisions that emerged were not merely legalistic but profoundly personal, reflecting the complex interplay of grief, loyalty, and societal expectations. Within the Whitman family, emotions ran high as relatives grappled with the legal recognition of a marriage that had ended so abruptly. Jonathan and Margaret Whitman, Eleanor's parents, found themselves torn between mourning their daughter's loss and confronting the ramifications of a union legally affirmed despite her death during the ceremony. To some members of the family, the signed certificate offered a measure of comfort, a recognition that Eleanor had been taken in marriage, however briefly, and that her commitment was honored. For others, the notion of a marriage that existed only on paper, created in the shadow of death, was deeply unsettling. Family gatherings became fraught with tension as arguments arose over the legitimacy of the marriage. Some elders feared that acknowledging the union would complicate inheritance and property matters, potentially ceding family assets to Thomas Caldwell. Others worried about the social implications for the family's standing within the community, concerned that the unusual circumstances would invite gossip and judgment. These internal conflicts played out quietly but with lasting impact, as loyalties were tested and relationships strained beneath the weight of uncertainty and sorrow. On Thomas Caldwell's side, the response was marked by a combination of grief and steadfast resolve. Thomas's family, though less deeply rooted in Willow Creek's traditions, rallied around their son's desire to honor his marriage to Eleanor. They insisted that the legal recognition of the union was not only a matter of personal justice, but also a necessary affirmation of the vows exchanged in good faith. For them, Thomas's status as Eleanor's widower was a truth that transcended the tragedy, deserving acknowledgement and respect. Thomas himself became a figure of sympathy and admiration among many townspeople. His quiet dignity in the face of heartbreak, coupled with his insistence on upholding the marriage's validity, garnered support from those who saw in his actions a testament to love's endurance, even amidst loss. He attended church services regularly, often seated alone but resolute, embodying a presence that was both mournful and defiant. However, not all in Willow Creek shared this view. The unusual circumstances of the marriage fueled gossip and moral debate throughout the town. At local gatherings, conversations oscillated between expressions of sympathy and whispered judgments. Some residents questioned the propriety of recognizing a marriage where death had intervened so abruptly, fearing that it blurred the lines between life's sacred rites and the finality of death. Moralists within the community raised concerns about the sanctity of marriage, arguing that the union's legitimacy was compromised by Eleanor's death before the ceremony's completion. To them, the legal affirmation of such a marriage threatened to undermine the solemnity and seriousness of the matrimonial covenant. They cautioned against setting a precedent that could erode traditional values and complicate the clear distinctions between betrothal, marriage, and widowhood. These debates were often intertwined with religious perspectives. Some clergy members emphasized the spiritual significance of vows exchanged before death, suggesting that the bond between Eleanor and Thomas was sanctified regardless of earthly circumstances. Others maintained that the sacrament of marriage required both parties to be alive to fully enter into the covenant, a condition unmet in this tragic case. The local press seized upon these divisions, publishing editorials and letters to the editor that reflected the town's conflicted sentiments. Headlines questioned whether love could truly transcend death in a legal sense, while human interest stories highlighted Thomas's devotion and the Whitman family's grief. The case became a focal point for broader discussions about marriage, mortality, and the limits of legal frameworks in addressing matters of the heart. Amid the public discourse, Thomas Caldwell's insistence on honoring the marriage gained momentum. He made formal appeals to local authorities and sought counsel from legal experts, advocating not only for recognition of his status, but also for the protection of his rights as Eleanor's surviving spouse. His efforts were bolstered by community members who viewed his cause as just and compassionate, rallying support through petitions and public statements. Conversely, some members of the Whitman family, while respectful of Thomas's grief, sought to challenge the marriage's validity. Legal representatives acting on their behalf argued that the circumstances of Eleanor's death precluded the formation of a binding contract, emphasizing the need to protect family interests and adhere to traditional legal interpretations. This opposition set the stage for a protracted legal struggle that mirrored the emotional conflicts playing out in social spheres. The tension between these positions was palpable during public meetings and church gatherings. Community leaders endeavored to mediate the disputes, encouraging dialogue and understanding, yet the underlying issues remained unresolved. The town found itself divided, not only between families but within itself, as residents wrestled with the implications of a marriage that defied easy categorization. In the midst of this turmoil, personal stories emerged that humanized the debate. Friends of Eleanor recalled her warmth and optimism, painting a portrait of a woman whose life was filled with promise and whose sudden death left a void that legal arguments could scarcely address. Neighbors spoke of Thomas's quiet grief and steadfast commitment, portraying him as a man devoted to honoring a love cut tragically short. These narratives underscored the complex interplay between legal status and emotional reality. For many, the question of whether the marriage was valid was inseparable from the deeper human experience of loss, loyalty, and the desire for recognition. The community's divided reactions reflected this tension, as people struggled to reconcile the demands of law and tradition with the messy realities of life and death. Social events in Willow Creek became subtle arenas where opinions were voiced and alliances formed. At church suppers and town meetings, conversations hinted at underlying divisions, while public displays of support for Thomas or the Whitman family signaled the ongoing negotiation of social loyalties. The wedding that had promised unity now symbolized a fracture within the community, revealing fault lines shaped by grief and conflicting interpretations of justice. Throughout these trials, Eleanor's memory remained at the center. Whether as a beloved daughter, a devoted bride, or a symbol of love lost, she occupied the thoughts and conversations of Willow Creek's residents. Her story became a touchstone for reflecting on the fragility of human plans, the power of commitment, and the ways in which society grapples with the unexpected intersections of life and death. As the legal battles loomed and social divisions deepened, the town's collective consciousness was marked by a profound ambivalence. The legitimacy of Eleanor and Thomas's marriage was no longer a private matter, but a public question that challenged the community's values and cohesion. In this crucible of grief and debate, Willow Creek confronted the complex realities of love, interrupted by death, and the enduring quest for meaning and justice amidst tragedy. The legal battles that erupted in the wake of Eleanor Whitman's untimely death during her wedding ceremony quickly evolved into a complex and contentious dispute over inheritance, property rights, and marital entitlements. What had begun as a private tragedy now occupied the courtrooms and public forums of Willow Creek, exposing the fissures between families, challenging established legal doctrines, and captivating the wider region with its unprecedented circumstances. Central to the dispute was the question of property ownership. The Whitman family possessed significant assets, including ancestral farmland, a stately family home, and various investments that had been carefully managed over generations. Eleanor, as the sole heir, stood poised to inherit much of this estate. However, her sudden death raised intricate legal questions about the distribution of her property, especially in light of the contested validity of her marriage to Thomas Caldwell. If the marriage were legally recognized, Thomas would assume the status of widower, entitled to a portion of Eleanor's estate under state inheritance laws. This included rights to the family home, financial assets, and any personal property designated to Eleanor as a married woman. Conversely, if the marriage were deemed invalid, Thomas's claims would be limited, and the estate would pass as though Eleanor had died unmarried, potentially leaving the Whitman family with greater control over the inheritance. The Whitman family, already fractured by grief and internal disagreements, found themselves engaged in a legal struggle to protect their interests. Their attorneys argued that the premature death of Eleanor during the ceremony prevented the formation of a valid marriage contract, thereby nullifying Thomas's claims. They emphasized the importance of adhering to traditional legal interpretations to maintain order and fairness, cautioning against setting a precedent that could invite future disputes. Thomas Caldwell's legal team countered with steadfast determination. They highlighted the signed marriage certificate, witness testimonies, and the exchange of vows as evidence that a valid marriage had been established before Eleanor's death. They argued that Thomas was entitled not only to recognition as Eleanor's legal spouse, but also to the protections and benefits that status conferred, including inheritance rights. Their position underscored the principle that marriage, as a binding contract, was consummated with mutual consent and public affirmation, regardless of subsequent death. The court proceedings that followed were marked by meticulous examination of evidence, legal precedents, and expert testimonies. Financial records, family wills, and property deeds were scrutinized to determine the extent of Eleanor's estate and the potential impact of marital status on its distribution. The testimonies of witnesses who had attended the wedding, including clergy and guests, were dissected to establish a clear timeline of events and the legal validity of the union. As the case unfolded, the complexities of matrimonial and inheritance law became starkly apparent. The unprecedented nature of the situation challenged judges and lawyers alike to interpret statutes that had not anticipated a death occurring mid-ceremony. Legal scholars were consulted to provide opinions on comparable cases, though few existed with such unique circumstances. The ambiguity fueled passionate debates over the letter of the law versus its spirit, and the role of courts in balancing fairness with precedent. Beyond the courtroom, the dispute reverberated through Willow Creek's social fabric. The town, already divided over the legitimacy of the marriage, found itself further polarized by the legal contest over property and inheritance. Public opinion swayed between sympathy for Thomas's plight and support for the Whitman family's desire to preserve their legacy. Letters to local newspapers articulated a range of views, reflecting the community's struggle to reconcile legal principles with human emotions. The Whitman family's internal tensions deepened as the financial stakes became clear. Some members advocated for a settlement to avoid prolonged litigation and public scrutiny, while others insisted on a firm legal stance to uphold familial rights. These divisions underscored the profound challenges faced by families navigating loss, compounded by legal uncertainty. Thomas Caldwell, meanwhile, faced not only legal opposition, but also the emotional toll of a drawn-out battle. His pursuit of recognition and rights was driven by a mixture of love, justice, and a desire to honor Eleanor's memory. He engaged with legal counsel tirelessly, prepared to defend his position in court and in the court of public opinion. His resilience inspired supporters, but also attracted criticism from detractors who questioned the propriety of asserting marital claims under such tragic circumstances. The courts grappled with balancing the competing interests of justice, compassion, and legal consistency. Hearings were marked by careful deliberation, as judges weighed the validity of the marriage, the implications for inheritance law, and the potential consequences of their rulings. The absence of clear legislative guidance on marriages, interrupted by death, complicated their task, forcing them to interpret existing laws in novel ways. One particularly contentious issue involved the timing of the marriage certificate's signing relative to Eleanor's death. Legal experts debated whether the act of signing after death could retroactively legitimize the marriage, or whether it was merely procedural, lacking substantive effect. The court considered the intent of the parties, the presence of witnesses, and the formal requirements of marriage law, striving to render a decision that balanced technical legality with equitable outcomes. The protracted legal proceedings attracted attention from neighboring counties and state officials, many of whom viewed the case as a precedent-setting moment. Discussions arose about the need for clearer statutes to address such extraordinary scenarios, highlighting the evolving nature of family law in response to unforeseen events. Throughout the ordeal, the human dimension of the dispute remained poignant. The Whitman family mourned their daughter's loss amid disputes over her legacy, while Thomas contended with the dual burdens of grief and legal contestation. The community's ambivalence reflected the broader tension between tradition and change, law and emotion, certainty and ambiguity. As the case progressed toward resolution, it became evident that the outcome would have lasting ramifications, not only for the parties directly involved, but for the legal understanding of marriage, death, and inheritance. The battle over Eleanor Whitman's estate crystallized the challenges that arise when life's unpredictable tragedies intersect with the rigid structures of law. In this crucible of grief and litigation, Willow Creek bore witness to a story that transcended its borders, a story of love interrupted, law contested, and the enduring quest for justice amid the complexities of human experience. The legal battles over inheritance and property rights illuminated the fragile boundaries between personal loss and societal order, revealing the intricate dance between law's demands and life's uncertainties. The case of Eleanor Whitman's marriage and untimely death during the ceremony did not merely captivate the small town of Willow Creek. It reverberated through legal circles and historical discourse, ultimately leaving an indelible mark on the evolution of marriage laws in the United States. What began as a deeply personal tragedy evolved into a landmark incident that challenged existing statutes and inspired critical reflection among jurists, lawmakers, and historians alike. In the years following the legal battles that ensued, the case was cited in numerous legal texts and court opinions as a precedent for interpreting the validity of marriages interrupted by death. Its complexity underscored the inadequacy of existing laws to address situations that straddled the boundary between contractual commitment and mortal finality. Scholars pointed to the case as a pivotal moment that exposed gaps in matrimonial law, prompting calls for legislative reform. Legal historians examined the Willow Creek incident as an example of how unforeseen circumstances could test the rigidity of statutory frameworks. The case was frequently referenced in discussions about the requirements for valid marriage, particularly the necessity of mutual consent and the completion of ceremony formalities. It raised fundamental questions. When does a marriage truly begin? Does the exchange of vows alone suffice, or must the ceremony reach its full conclusion? And crucially, how does the law reconcile the permanence of death with the temporal nature of human contracts? The debate extended beyond pure legal theory to the practical implications for inheritance, property rights, and social recognition. The Whitman-Caldwell dispute became a case study in the delicate balancing act courts must perform between honoring individual intentions and maintaining social order. Legal scholars argued that the case illuminated the need for clearer statutory language to prevent similar ambiguities in the future. In response to the public and professional interest generated by the case, several states undertook reviews of their marriage laws during the subsequent decades. Legislators recognized that the existing statutes, often written in broad and sometimes archaic terms, failed to anticipate such extraordinary scenarios. Amendments were proposed and enacted to clarify the conditions under which a marriage could be considered legally binding, including provisions addressing consent, ceremony completion, and the impact of death during the proceedings. The case also found resonance in theological and moral discussions. Religious scholars and clergy debated the sacramental nature of marriage in light of the incident, exploring the extent to which spiritual bonds transcended physical life and legal recognition. Some argued that the vows exchanged by Eleanor and Thomas represented a sacred union, unbroken by death, while others maintained that the sacrament required the living presence and mutual participation of both parties. Beyond legal and religious spheres, the story of the bride who died mid-ceremony became woven into the cultural fabric of the region. It was recounted in local histories, folklore, and commemorations, serving as a poignant reminder of love's fragility and the unpredictability of fate. The tale inspired plays, articles, and even poetry, each interpretation exploring themes of devotion, loss, and the intersection of human intention with the inexorable forces of mortality. Historians noted that the case reflected broader societal tensions of the early 20th century, a period marked by evolving social norms and the gradual modernization of legal institutions. It highlighted the challenges faced by communities attempting to reconcile traditional customs with the complexities of modern life, particularly as legal systems struggled to keep pace with changing realities. The enduring legacy of Eleanor Whitman's story also lay in its capacity to provoke empathy and reflection. It compelled jurists and laypeople alike to consider not just the letter of the law, but its human consequences. The case became a touchstone for debates about justice, fairness, and the ways in which law must adapt to encompass the full spectrum of human experience. In legal education, the Willow Creek case was incorporated into curricula as an example of how extraordinary facts can illuminate the limitations of legal doctrines. Students studied the case to understand the interplay between statutory interpretation, judicial discretion, and societal values. It served as a cautionary tale about the importance of clear legislation and the challenges inherent in applying abstract principles to real-life tragedies. Moreover, the case influenced subsequent jurisprudence concerning marriages interrupted by death or other unforeseen events. Courts across various jurisdictions grappled with similar questions, often referring back to the Whitman incident as a foundational example. Judicial opinions explored the nuances of consent, ceremony, and timing, using the case to guide interpretations that balanced legal certainty with compassion. The local community of Willow Creek, while forever marked by the sorrow of Eleanor's death, came to embrace the historical significance of her story. Annual commemorations and historical society events kept the memory alive, honoring her as a figure whose life and death transcended personal tragedy to shape the course of legal and social history. Eleanor's story also served as a catalyst for broader conversations about the nature of commitment and the human desire to find meaning in loss. It challenged simplistic understandings of marriage as merely a legal contract, inviting contemplation of its spiritual, emotional, and societal dimensions. The paradox of a bride who died mid-ceremony yet remained legally wed resonated deeply, symbolizing the complex interplay between life's certainties and uncertainties. As the decades passed, scholars continued to revisit the case, drawing new insights from its rich complexities. It remained a subject of fascination, not only for legal professionals, but also for cultural historians, theologians, and writers who saw in Eleanor Whitman's story a mirror reflecting the enduring mysteries of love, death, and the law. In sum, the legacy of the bride who died mid-ceremony yet remained married is multifaceted. It is a tale of legal challenge and reform, of social debate and cultural memory, of personal tragedy and communal identity. It stands as a testament to the enduring human quest to understand and honor the bonds that tie us, even when those bonds are tested by the ultimate finality of death. Through this story, the limits of law and the depths of human experience converge, leaving an indelible imprint on history and reminding us of the profound complexities that underlie life's most sacred commitments. The story of Eleanor Whitman, the bride who died mid-ceremony yet remained legally married, has endured far beyond the confines of Willow Creek, leaving a lasting legacy that continues to ripple through legal history, social customs, and the collective consciousness. It stands as a haunting testament to the complexities of love, law, and mortality, challenging conventional understandings of commitment and the boundaries between life and death. In the aftermath of the unprecedented legal battles and social debates, the case became a catalyst for significant changes in wedding protocols and marriage laws. Legislatures across various states began revisiting and refining statutes to address the ambiguities exposed by Eleanor's case. Clearer definitions emerged regarding the requirements for valid marriage, including stipulations about consent, ceremony completion, and what occurs when death intervenes during matrimonial rites. These reforms sought to provide guidance for future situations that might otherwise plunge families and communities into similar uncertainty. Beyond legal reforms, Eleanor's story influenced cultural practices surrounding weddings and death. Clergy became more attentive to the timing and documentation of ceremonies, ensuring that marriages were conclusively and appropriately recorded. Communities grew more conscious of the fragile line between celebration and tragedy, often instituting protocols to navigate unexpected events with both dignity and clarity. The intersection of marriage and mortality gained new recognition as a domain requiring sensitivity, foresight, and legal precision. The enduring mystery of Eleanor's story also sparked philosophical and emotional reflections on the nature of commitment beyond the temporal limits of life. Her case invites us to consider whether love and vows can transcend death, and what it means to bind oneself to another in the face of inevitable mortality. It challenges the assumption that legal and social contracts are purely earthly and finite, suggesting instead a profound human yearning for continuity and connection even amid loss. For the town of Willow Creek, Eleanor's legacy became woven into its identity. The community, once divided and grief-stricken, found a form of collective remembrance through which to honor her life and the extraordinary circumstances of her death. Annual commemorations, historical society presentations, and local storytelling preserved her memory as a symbol of resilience and the enduring power of love. Her story became a touchstone for discussions about the fragility of life and the strength found in human bonds. In the broader cultural landscape, Eleanor Whitman's tale inspired artists, writers, and thinkers. It found expression in literature, theater, and visual arts, each medium exploring facets of the human experience revealed by her unique story. The paradox of a marriage sealed in the shadow of death resonated as a metaphor for the intersection of hope and despair, permanence and impermanence. Legal scholars continue to study the case as a seminal moment in the evolution of matrimonial law, reminding practitioners and lawmakers of the need to reconcile human complexity with legal clarity. It stands as a cautionary example of how rigid legal frameworks must adapt to accommodate the unpredictable nature of human life and the profound emotional realities that underlie contractual relationships. At its core, Eleanor Whitman's story challenges us to reflect on the essence of commitment. It suggests that marriage, while grounded in legal and social structures, is also an expression of human vulnerability and aspiration, a promise that can be tested by circumstances beyond our control. Her case blurs the boundaries between life and death, law and love, past and future, compelling us to reconsider how we define and honor the ties that bind. The lasting impact of Eleanor's story is a testament to the enduring human quest to make sense of loss and to find meaning in the face of tragedy. It underscores the importance of compassionate legal frameworks that respect both the letter of the law and the spirit of human relationships. Her case remains a profound example of the ways in which extraordinary events can illuminate the deepest truths about our shared humanity. As we look back on the events of that autumn day in 1923, when a bride's life was cut short moments after she pledged herself to another, we are reminded that history is not merely a record of facts, but a tapestry of stories that shape our understanding of the world. Eleanor Whitman's story endures because it speaks to universal themes: love and loss, certainty and ambiguity, the intertwining of joy and sorrow. In remembering Eleanor, we honor not only a young woman whose life ended too soon, but also the complexities of human experience that her story reveals. Her legacy invites ongoing reflection on the nature of marriage, the reach of the law, and the profound mysteries that lie at the heart of human connection. It is a story that continues to inspire, challenge, and move us, reminding us that even in death, the bonds we forge can hold a powerful and lasting presence.